but of the millionaire's promise. A story of justice, redemption, and unexpected fortune. She was wrongfully fired and sat there crying at the bus stop when a man in a tailored suit approached her. Nobody could imagine that this encounter would change not only her life, but the lives of countless others. Margaret Williams arrived early that morning at Apex Financial Tower, just as she had done for over 8 years. The building was still empty, only the night security guards finishing their shift. She greeted James, the doorman, with that genuine smile that brightened the lobby every single day. Nobody imagined that this would be the last time she would walk through those doors as an employee. "Morning, Margaret. Another day at the office, huh?" James said, buzzing her through to the elevators. "Good morning, James. You know how it is. Work doesn't wait for anyone," she replied, adjusting her cleaning cart that she knew like the back of her hand. Margaret rode up to the 18th floor, where the executive offices were located. This was her assigned section. Massive offices with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the awakening city below. She always started with the office of Chief Financial Officer, Harrison Blake, an imposing office with a mahogany desk that cost more than her annual salary. While dusting the furniture, Margaret noticed papers scattered across the desk. This wasn't normal. Harrison always left everything organized before leaving. She carefully gathered the documents, not reading anything, just organizing them as she always did. It was her job to keep everything clean and tidy. How strange, she thought. I've never seen him leave his office this disorganized. Margaret continued her routine. She cleaned the bathrooms, vacuumed the carpets, organized the bookshelves. 3 hours later, when the business day began to bring life to the building, she went downstairs for coffee in the employee break room. That's when she heard the first conversation that made her world collapse. "Someone broke into Harrison's office during the night," whispered Sarah from reception to other employees. "Important documents went missing. $1 million contracts. Management is desperate." Margaret's heart raced. She had been in that office, had touched those papers, but only to organize them, as she always did. She felt a chill in her stomach, a terrible feeling she couldn't explain. They've already called the security company to review the cameras," Sarah continued. "Whoever did this is going to pay dearly." Margaret quickly finished her coffee and returned to work. She tried to focus on her tasks, but couldn't get the conversation out of her head. She felt something terrible was about to happen. The phone rang on the 18th floor. It was for her. The voice on the other end was cold, without any trace of courtesy. "Margaret, you need to come down to Human Resources immediately. It's urgent." "Did something happen, sir?" she asked, but the line had already been disconnected. The elevator had never taken so long to descend. Each second felt like an eternity. Margaret felt her hands sweating, her heart beating too fast. When she reached the 8th floor, she saw Michael, the HR manager, waiting for her with an expression she had never seen before. "Sit here, Margaret," he said, pointing to a chair in front of his desk. The room felt colder than usual, or maybe it was just her perception. "What happened, Mr. Michael? Did I do something wrong?" Michael opened a folder and pulled out some photos. They were images from security cameras. Margaret saw herself on the screen, entering Harrison's office, handling the papers on the desk. "Margaret, can you explain what you were doing with these documents?" The question hit like lightning. Margaret felt the world spinning around her. "I was just organizing them, Mr. Michael, like I always do. The papers were scattered. I gathered everything and left it organized on the desk. It's my job." "Margaret, these documents contain information about $1 million contracts. Contracts that are now in the hands of our competition. How do you explain this?" The words came out of his mouth like daggers. Margaret couldn't understand what was happening. She felt like she was living a nightmare. "Mr. Michael, I don't understand anything about contracts. I can barely read these business things. I just cleaned the office, like I've been doing for years. Why are you telling me this? Margaret, you were the only person who had access to these documents before they disappeared. The cameras don't lie. The injustice of that accusation hurt more than any physical pain she had ever felt. Margaret had worked her entire life with honesty, raised her children with dignity. She had never taken so much as a pencil that wasn't hers. I didn't do anything wrong, she repeated, but her voice came out weak, as if the words themselves doubted their own truth. Michael called 2 witnesses, employees Margaret had known for years, people she talked to every day, whom she greeted with warmth. Can you confirm that Margaret had free access to the 18th floor? Michael asked. Yes, she always cleaned up there, one of them replied, avoiding eye contact with her. And have you seen her handling papers on the desks? Yes, she always organized everything, said the other, also looking away. Margaret looked at these people, hoping someone would tell the complete truth, that they would say she always organized documents with care, that she had never taken anything, that she was a trustworthy person, but the silence was crueler than any accusation. Margaret, Michael continued, the company cannot keep an employee under suspicion of leaking confidential information. You're fired for just cause. The words echoed in the room like thunder. Fired for just cause. This meant she wouldn't be entitled to anything, not unemployment benefits, not severance pay, nothing. After years of honest work, she was being treated like a thief. Mr. Michael, for God's sake, I didn't do any of this. I have a family to support, bills to pay. Please review the cameras properly. Someone must have entered after me. The investigations show you were the only one with access to the documents. The decision is final. Margaret felt tears streaming down her face, but tried to maintain composure. She didn't want to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her broken. You have 15 minutes to collect your things from your locker and leave the building. Security will escort you. 15 minutes. 15 minutes to end years of honest work. Margaret stood up from the chair with trembling legs. She felt like she was walking toward her own funeral. In the locker room, she opened her small locker. Few things, a spare blouse, some medications, a photo of her children that always motivated her on difficult days. She put everything in a plastic bag, her hands shaking so much she could barely fold the clothes. Other cleaning staff were there, but nobody approached. Nobody said a word of support. The fear of being associated with someone accused of theft was greater than years of friendship. Margaret, did you really do this? Asked Marina, the only one who had the courage to speak. Marina, you've known me for so long. Do you think I would do something like this? Margaret replied through tears. Marina lowered her eyes. I don't know what to think anymore. The answer hurt more than the accusation itself. If the people who lived with her every day were doubting, how would she convince anyone of her innocence? The security guard waited at the locker room door. A young man who always greeted her politely now looked at her as if she were a criminal. Let's go, Mrs. Margaret. I need to escort you to the exit. The walk through the corridors was the longest of her life. Employees stopped to look. Some whispered, others looked away in shame. Margaret kept her head high, but felt each whisper like a stab in the chest. In the lobby, James, the doorman who had greeted her that morning, couldn't look her in the eyes. The woman who had arrived smiling that morning was leaving humiliated, carrying her few belongings in a plastic bag. Thank you for returning your badge, said the security guard, extending his hand. Margaret took the badge from around her neck, that small piece of plastic she had worn with pride for years. She handed it over without saying a word. The building's revolving door had never felt so heavy. Each step outside that place was like leaving behind not just a job, but her dignity, her reputation, her very identity. On the sidewalk, Margaret stopped and looked back. The imposing apex financial tower rose against the sky. Inside, hundreds of people continued their lives. For them, Margaret no longer existed. She was just another employee who had left for just cause. The bus stop was a few meters away. Margaret walked slowly, feeling the weight of the plastic bag and the much heavier weight of injustice. She sat on the cold bench and let the tears fall freely for the first time that terrible day. "How am I going to explain this to my children?" she thought. "How am I going to pay the bills? Who's going to hire me after being fired for just cause?" The questions multiplied in her head, each one more desperate than the other. Margaret looked at the photo of her children she had taken from the locker. 2 kids who depended on her, who believed in her, who would never imagine seeing their mother in this situation. The bus was taking forever to arrive, or maybe time was passing too slowly. Margaret hugged the plastic bag against her chest and cried like she hadn't cried in a long time. She cried for the injustice, for the humiliation, for the uncertain future that opened before her. At that moment, sitting at that bus stop, Margaret didn't imagine that her life was about to change in a way she never could have imagined. That the greatest injustice of her life would also be the beginning of the greatest turnaround she had ever experienced. Margaret remained seated on that cold bench at the bus stop, hugging the plastic bag as if it were her last possession in the world. Tears streamed down her face relentlessly, mixing with the despair that grew in her chest with each passing minute. People walked around her, hurried with their own lives, without even noticing the destroyed woman who had just lost everything. "How am I going to get home and tell the children that Mommy lost her job?" she thought, holding tight to the photo of her children. "How am I going to look them in the eyes and explain that we won't have money for the things we need?" The traffic noise seemed distant. Cars passed, horns honked. Life continued its normal rhythm, while Margaret's world had completely collapsed. She looked at the apex financial tower one more time, trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong. 8 years of honest work, she murmured to herself. 8 years waking up early, doing everything right, and this is how it ends. At that moment, a man in a suit stopped in front of her. Margaret didn't look up, thinking he was just waiting for the bus, but she noticed he didn't move away. He stood there as if he were looking at her. "Excuse me, ma'am," a gentle voice said. "Is everything all right?" Margaret raised her face and saw a well-dressed man with a genuinely concerned expression. He had that manner of someone accustomed to responsibilities, but his eyes showed a kindness she didn't expect to find at that moment. "Yes, it is. Thank you," Margaret lied, quickly wiping away the tears. "You can go ahead, sir." Thomas Richardson observed the scene more carefully. He saw the plastic bag in her lap, the red eyes from crying so much, the posture of someone who had just received life's hardest blow. He looked at the Apex Financial Tower badge, still partially visible inside the plastic bag. He knew that building well. He had done business with them several times. "Did you work at Apex Financial?" he asked carefully. Margaret felt her chest tighten again. "I used to," she replied, lowering her head, "until this morning." "What happened, if you don't mind me asking?" Margaret hesitated. How could she explain to a stranger that she had been accused of theft? How could she tell him she was being treated like a criminal after years of honest work? "They accused me of something I didn't do," she said finally. "They fired me for just cause." Thomas noticed the pain in her voice. There was something in the way she spoke that conveyed honesty. She didn't seem like someone trying to justify something wrong she had done. She seemed like someone genuinely wronged. "What kind of accusation?" he asked, maintaining a respectful tone. They said I took important documents, that I passed information to competitors." The words came out with difficulty. "Sir, I work in cleaning. I can't even read these business things properly. How would I know what was important or not?" Thomas paid attention to every word. His experience as a businessman had taught him to identify when someone was lying, and this woman definitely was not making up a story. "But did you organize some papers on some executive's desk?" he asked, as if he already knew the answer. Margaret opened her eyes, surprised. "How do you know?" "Because I've seen similar situations. Someone steals important information, and the most vulnerable person ends up taking the blame." For the first time since that morning, Margaret felt that someone was believing her. That's exactly what happened. "I only organized the papers that were scattered on the desk, like I've been doing for years, but the cameras showed me handling the documents, and that was enough proof for them." Thomas shook his head indignantly. "And nobody was interested in investigating properly. Nobody checked if other people had access to that office. They said only I had access. But that's not true. Many people go in and out of those offices, executives, assistants, maintenance staff. But I was the easiest to blame." "Why the easiest?" Margaret gave a bitter smile. "Because I'm a janitor, right? Who's going to believe the word of a janitor against the word of important people?" The answer hurt Thomas's heart. He himself had been judged by appearance when he was younger and hadn't yet built his fortune. He knew how cruel prejudice based on social position could be. "Do you have family?" he asked. "I have 2 young children." "They depend only on me." Margaret held tight to the photo in the plastic bag. "And now, how am I going to support them? Who's going to hire me after being fired for just cause?" Thomas saw tears returning to her eyes. He felt something stirring inside his chest, an indignation that grew with each word of that story. "Are you absolutely certain you didn't do anything wrong?" Margaret looked directly into his eyes. "I swear on my children's lives that I didn't do anything but organize those papers. If I had known this would cause problems, I wouldn't have even touched them." Thomas believed her. There was a sincerity in that look that was impossible to fake. "What's your name?" "Margaret. Margaret Williams." "Margaret, my name is Thomas Richardson. I own a company here in the city, and I can guarantee you one thing. If you really are innocent, this injustice won't stand." Margaret didn't understand what he meant. "What do you mean, Mr. Thomas?" "I know people at Apex Financial. I've done business with them, and if what happened is what I think happened, someone's going to have to give explanations." "But you don't even know me. Why would you get involved in trouble like this for my sake?" Thomas stopped to think about the question. Why was he offering to help a stranger? Maybe because he recognized in her the same dignity his own mother had always shown when things got difficult. Maybe because he knew that small injustices become big problems when nobody has the courage to face them. "Margaret, let me tell you something. When I was young, I was also accused of something I didn't do. I also lost a job because of injustice, and at that moment I prayed for someone to appear who would believe in me. And did someone appear? Nobody appeared. I had to manage on my own, and it was very difficult, but I promised myself that if I ever had the means to help someone in a similar situation, I wouldn't let it pass." Margaret felt her heart warming for the first time that terrible day. "Do you really believe I didn't do anything wrong?" "I believe you, and I'm going to prove it." "How?" Thomas got up from the bench and adjusted his coat. "Leave that to me. Give me your phone number. I'll contact you soon." Margaret took a crumpled paper from her purse and wrote down the number. "Mr. Thomas, I have no way to pay you for this help." "Who said anything about payment?" "Some things in life we do because it's the right thing to do." Margaret's bus finally arrived. She stood up, still holding the plastic bag, but now with a small flame of hope lit in her chest. "Margaret," Thomas said before she got on the bus, "promise me something." "What?" "Don't give up. Don't let this injustice break you. Sometimes the worst situations in life are just the beginning of much better things. Margaret got on the bus with tears in her eyes, but this time they were different tears. They were tears from someone who had found a little faith in humanity just when she needed it most. Through the bus window, she saw Thomas still standing at the stop, watching the vehicle drive away. That man had appeared out of nowhere and was willing to help a stranger without asking for anything in return. Maybe the world wasn't as cruel as it seemed that morning. Thomas stood there for a few more minutes, watching the bus disappear into traffic. He took his phone out of his pocket and called Marcus, his personal lawyer. "Marcus, I need you to investigate a situation at Apex Financial. An employee was fired today for just cause, accused of leaking confidential information. Do you have any business interest in this, Thomas?" "I have a personal interest. I believe a serious injustice has occurred, and I want to discover the truth." Thomas hung up and walked back to his car. He didn't know how yet, but he was going to find out who really stole those documents, and when he did, Margaret Williams was going to get the reparation she deserved. While driving back to his company, Thomas thought about the conversation he had just had. It had been years since he felt that sensation of such clear purpose, as if the universe had put Margaret in his path precisely at that moment. And sometimes, he thought, we need to help others to remember what really matters in life. And that day, both Margaret and Thomas didn't imagine that that chance encounter at the bus stop would be the beginning of one of the most beautiful stories of justice and redemption their lives had ever witnessed. Thomas couldn't concentrate on anything else that day. The image of Margaret crying at the bus stop wouldn't leave his head. Sitting in his office at Richardson Consulting Group, he looked out the window without really seeing the city outside. His mind was focused on one thing: discovering the truth about what had happened at Apex Financial. Marcus, his lawyer, arrived in the late afternoon with a folder under his arm and a serious expression on his face. "Thomas, you won't believe what I discovered about this story of the fired employee," he said, sitting in front of the desk. "Tell me everything, Marcus. I want to know every detail. First, I confirmed the woman exists. Margaret Williams worked there for over 8 years, always had a clean record, never caused any problems. But things get interesting when we look at who really had access to that office." Thomas leaned forward. Who else had access? Besides Margaret, at least 6 different people entered that office in the days leading up to the document's disappearance. Executives, assistants, IT staff, even a maintenance electrician. And why did they only blame her? Marcus opened the folder and pulled out some sheets. Because she was the only one who appeared on camera directly handling the papers. But here's the problem. The recordings I managed to get show that she only organized the documents and left. She didn't take anything with her. Thomas felt a mixture of indignation and relief. Margaret had told the truth. And continue. "Now comes the part that will shock you. I got a source inside the company, an employee who was afraid to speak but decided to tell the truth." What truth? The documents weren't stolen by chance. It was internal work planned for weeks, and the person responsible has direct access to the CFO's office. Thomas's heart raced. Who? Derek Mitchell, executive assistant to Harrison Blake himself. He's the one who really had complete access to the contracts, knew the value of each document, understood the security systems. Thomas slammed his fist on the desk. That bastard let an innocent woman take the blame. Worse than that, according to my source, Derek has been passing information to the competing company for months. The documents that disappeared were just the tip of the iceberg. He had already leaked data from previous bids. How did he manage to make Margaret look guilty? Marcus flipped through some papers. Simple and cowardly. Derek knew her routine. He knew Margaret always organized papers that were scattered on the desk. The night before the theft, He purposely left the most important documents scattered, knowing she would handle them the next day. So the cameras would show her touching the documents. Exactly. And while Margaret was innocently organizing, Derek had already photographed the contracts with his phone days before. When they discovered the leak, he was the first to suggest checking who had recently handled the papers. Thomas felt anger growing inside him. How many people know this? Few, and all afraid to speak. Derek has influence there. He's considered the director's right-hand man. Nobody wants to displease him. Do we have concrete evidence? Marcus smiled for the first time. We do. My source managed to get copies of the messages Derek exchanged with the competing company, emails, bank transfers, everything documented. Thomas stood up from his chair, walking to the window. Outside, the evening traffic showed thousands of people returning home after an honest day's work. People like Margaret, who woke up early, did their service with dignity, and didn't deserve to be humiliated because of others' greed. Marcus, I want you to prepare everything, every proof, every document, every piece of evidence. We're going to expose this, Derek. Thomas, there's something you need to know. Margaret's situation is worse than we imagined. How so? She was fired for just cause. This means that, besides not being entitled to unemployment benefits, she also has her name tarnished in the market. No company wants to hire someone fired for leaking confidential information. Thomas felt his chest tighten. Margaret was paying an absurd price for something she didn't do. We need to reverse this situation quickly. I'm going to schedule a meeting with Apex Financial's board. But Thomas, they're going to try to cover this up. A company of their size doesn't want the negative publicity of admitting they fired an innocent person. Leave that to me. I know some influential people in the media. If they try to cover it up, the story will become national headlines. Marcus put the papers back in the folder. There's one more thing. I found out where Margaret lives. Where? In a simple neighborhood, in a rented house with her 2 children. The older daughter has health problems, needs expensive medications. The younger son is about to start school, and she was saving money to buy school supplies. The information hit Thomas like a punch in the stomach. Margaret wasn't just suffering from wounded pride or lost dignity. She was facing concrete, real problems that affected her children's lives. Marcus, I want you to find out how much she needs for basic monthly expenses. Medicine, rent, school, food, everything. Are you thinking of helping financially? I'm thinking of doing what any decent person would do in a situation like this. At that moment, Thomas's phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize. Hello, Mr. Thomas. This is Margaret. Margaret Williams. You gave me your card this morning. Her voice was shaky, as if she had been crying a lot. Thomas signaled for Marcus to stay quiet. Hi, Margaret. How are you feeling? Mr. Thomas, I wanted to thank you for your kindness today. It made a difference to have someone who believed in me, but I'm calling to say something else. Tell me. I don't want you to get into trouble because of me. I thought better about it, and maybe it's better to leave things as they are. Thomas felt his heart race. Margaret, why are you saying this? Because I found out that Derek, the director's assistant, was spreading word that if anyone tried to defend me or say anything, they'd have problems too. I'm afraid they'll do something bad to you. The call confirmed everything Marcus had discovered. Derek was trying to intimidate possible defenders of Margaret. Margaret, listen to what I'm going to tell you. Don't be afraid of him. People like Derek only have power while others are afraid. But what if he really does something? He won't do anything, because tomorrow I'm going to Apex Financial with proof of everything he did. Silence on the other end of the line. Thomas could hear Margaret breathing heavily. "Mr. Thomas, did you discover something?" "I discovered that you were right from the beginning. I discovered who really stole the documents, and I discovered that they made you a scapegoat on purpose." Margaret began crying on the other end of the line. "I knew it. I knew someone had done this to me on purpose, but nobody believed me. Margaret, I promise you something. By the end of this week, you'll have your dignity back, and whoever did this to you will pay for every tear you shed." "How can you be so sure?" Thomas looked at Marcus, who was nodding that they had sufficient evidence. "Because truth always wins, Margaret. Sometimes it takes time, but it always wins, and this time it has competent lawyers on its side." After hanging up, Thomas remained silent for a few minutes, processing everything he had discovered. Margaret wasn't just a victim of circumstances, she was the victim of a deliberate and cowardly plan. "Marcus, I want you to call Apex Financial now. Schedule an urgent meeting with the entire board for tomorrow morning." "What reason do I give?" "Say we have information about serious irregularities involving confidential data leaks, and if they don't receive us, the information goes straight to the press." Marcus smiled. "Good, they'll receive us. And Marcus, one last thing. I want you to prepare 2 sets of documents, one with the evidence against Derek and another with a proposal for reintegration and compensation for Margaret." "What kind of compensation?" Thomas thought about her children, the expensive medications, the humiliation suffered, the forced unemployment. Compensation that covers not only material damages, but especially moral damages. Margaret will come out of this story not just clean, but recognized as the victim of serious injustice. That night, Thomas couldn't sleep well. He kept imagining Margaret trying to explain to her children why food was scarcer, why she couldn't buy necessary medications, why life had suddenly become so difficult. But he also imagined the moment when she would receive the call confirming her innocence, the moment when she would return to work with her head held high, the moment when the very colleagues who abandoned her would have to apologize. Tomorrow, thought Thomas, justice will finally reach Margaret. And for the first time in a long time, Thomas fell asleep with the feeling that he was doing something really important with his life, something that went beyond profits and business. He was defending the dignity of an honest person, and that was worth more than any contract he had ever signed. Thomas arrived at Apex Financial exactly on time. This time he wasn't just observing the building from outside. He was entering as someone who had information capable of shaking that entire corporate structure. Marcus accompanied him, carrying 2 folders that contained Margaret's future and the end of Derek's charade. James, the same doorman who had seen Margaret leave humiliated, now received them with all courtesy. He had no idea those men were there to reverse one of the greatest injustices ever committed in that building. "Good morning, gentlemen. The board is waiting for you in the conference room on the 20th floor. In the elevator, Thomas felt a mixture of anxiety and determination. He was about to confront powerful people, but he had something they didn't expect: documented truth. "Are you ready for this, Thomas?" Marcus asked, adjusting his tie. "I was born ready. Margaret deserves to have her dignity restored." The elevator doors opened on the 20th floor. An elegant receptionist guided them through a luxurious corridor to an imposing conference room. Solid wood table, leather chairs, panoramic view of the city, the kind of environment where million-dollar decisions were made every day. Harrison Blake, the chief financial officer, was seated at the head of the table. Next to him, 3 other directors Thomas recognized from business events, and there, in a discreet chair beside the director, was Derek Mitchell, the man who had destroyed Margaret's life to protect his own dirty secrets. "Gentlemen, thank you for coming," Harrison said, extending his hand. "We understand you have information about irregularities in our company." Thomas shook his hand, looking directly into his eyes. "Do we have information that will surprise all of you?" Derek shifted uncomfortably in his chair. There was something in Thomas's posture that made him nervous. Marcus opened the first folder and distributed copies of documents to each director. "Gentlemen, what you're seeing is evidence of a confidential information leak scheme that has been happening in this company for months." Harrison picked up the papers and began reading. His expression changed quickly. "And these are our internal contracts. How did you get these?" "We got them the same way your competition got them," Thomas replied. "Through someone who has privileged access to this information." Derek cleared his throat nervously. "Excuse me, but who are you, gentlemen? Why are you making this kind of accusation?" Thomas turned to him slowly. We are the people who discovered that you let an innocent woman take the blame for your actions." The silence in the room became heavy. Harrison looked alternately at the documents and at Derek, trying to process the information. "What exactly are you talking about?" one of the other directors asked. Marcus opened the second folder. "We're talking about Margaret Williams, the employee you fired for just 'cause a few days ago." "The janitor who stole the documents?" Harrison asked. "The janitor you accused of stealing documents," Thomas corrected, his voice getting stronger. "When the person who really leaked the information is sitting here at this table." All eyes turned to Derek, who had gone pale as paper. "This is absurd." Derek tried to defend himself. "You can't come here making unfounded accusations." Marcus put more documents on the table. Screenshots of messages exchanged between Derek Mitchell and representatives of Sterling Competition, bank transfer receipts, records of system access outside business hours. Harrison picked up the transfer receipts. The amounts were high, too high to be ignored. "Derek, can you explain these transfers?" This must be some mistake," Derek stammered. "And someone must have falsified this information." Thomas stood up from his chair. "Derek, you knew Margaret's routine perfectly. You knew she always organized papers that were left messy on desks. The night before the supposed theft, you purposely left the most important documents scattered on Harrison's desk." "That doesn't make sense," Derek tried to argue, but the desperation in his voice was evident. "It makes perfect sense," Marcus continued. "You had already photographed the contracts days before with your own phone. When they discovered the leak, you yourself suggested checking the cameras to see who had handled the documents." Harrison slammed his hand on the table. "Derek, is this true?" "Harrison, you've known me for years. I work here with dedication. I've always been loyal to the company." "Loyal?" Thomas repeated the word with irony. "You call destroying an honest woman's life to cover your own crimes loyalty?" One of the directors, who had remained quiet until now, spoke up. "If these accusations are true, we're talking about a premeditated scheme to frame an innocent employee." Marcus nodded. "Exactly. Margaret Williams was chosen as a scapegoat because she was the most vulnerable person, a janitor without resources to defend herself adequately." "And you're absolutely certain of this information?" Harrison asked, still processing the dimension of what was being revealed. Thomas looked directly at Derek. "You, Derek, want to tell your bosses about the messages you sent to company employees, threatening anyone who tried to defend Margaret?" Derek suddenly stood up from his chair. "I'm not going to sit here listening to these slanders." "Sit down," Harrison ordered with authority. "We're not finished yet." Derek sat back down, clearly defeated. Marcus placed another document on the table. This is a technical report showing that the leaked data was accessed from Derek's personal computer, using his login outside business hours." "Derek," Harrison said, his voice loaded with disappointment, "did you really do this?" The silence extended for long seconds. Derek looked at his own hands as if searching for an exit that didn't exist. "I was having financial problems," he finally admitted. "Sterling offered a lot of money for the information. I never wanted anyone to get hurt." "But you let Margaret take the blame," Thomas exploded. "A woman with young children who depended on work to survive." "I didn't know it would come to this," Derek murmured. "I didn't know." One of the directors expressed indignation. "You orchestrated a plan to frame an innocent person." Harrison stood up, clearly shaken. "Derek, you're fired, and we're going to take all legal measures against you." "Harrison, please," Derek tried to beg. "There's no please. You betrayed the company's trust and destroyed an innocent person's life." Thomas felt deep satisfaction seeing justice finally happening, but there was still a pending issue. "Gentlemen," he said, "now we need to talk about Margaret Williams." "What about her?" Harrison asked. "She needs to be immediately reinstated with public apologies, and she needs to receive fair compensation for the moral and material damages suffered." "You're right," Harrison admitted. "We committed a serious injustice against her." Marcus opened the third folder. "We prepared a settlement proposal. Immediate reintegration, compensation for moral damages, payment for all days off, and an official declaration confirming her innocence." Thomas looked at Derek one last time. "I hope it was worth trading your dignity for dirty money." Derek couldn't answer. He left the room escorted by security, carrying only the shame of being discovered. "Gentlemen," Harrison said to Thomas and Marcus, "we'll do everything necessary to repair the injustice committed against Margaret Williams." Thomas smiled for the first time since entering that room. "Margaret is waiting for a call from you." When they left the building, Marcus asked, "Thomas, how do you think Margaret will react when she finds out about everything?" Thomas looked at the sky and smiled. "I think for the first time in many days, she'll be able to sleep in peace." And he was right. The truth had finally won, and Margaret was about to discover that justice, even when it arrives late, still exists in the world. Margaret was in the kitchen of her small house, looking at the last bill envelope that had arrived in the mail, overdue electricity bill. The money she had managed to borrow from her sister was running out, and she had no idea how she would pay the basic expenses of the next month. The children were playing in the living room, unaware of their mother's concern, but Margaret knew that soon they too would feel the effects of the financial situation. The phone rang. Margaret hesitated before answering, thinking it could be some creditor calling about an overdue bill. "Hello, Margaret. This is Harrison Blake, Chief Financial Officer of Apex Financial." Margaret's heart almost stopped. Why would the director himself be calling her? Did they want to sue her for something else? "Yes, sir. How can I help you?" "Margaret, first I want to ask for your deepest apologies for what happened. We discovered that you were the victim of a terrible injustice." Margaret sat in the kitchen chair, her legs trembling. What do you mean, sir?" "We discovered that Derek Mitchell, my executive assistant, was the one who really leaked the confidential information. He set up a scheme to make you look guilty." The words echoed in Margaret's head as if she were dreaming. "Are you serious, sir?" "Completely serious. Derek confessed everything. He's already been fired, and we're taking all legal measures against him." Margaret began to cry, not from sadness, but from relief. A relief so deep it felt like a 1,000-pound weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "I knew it," she managed to say through tears. "I knew I hadn't done anything wrong." "Margaret, we want you to come back to work with us immediately, with all rights restored and compensation for the moral damages you suffered." "Compensation?" "Yes. And we also want to make an official statement to all employees, clarifying your innocence and making public apologies for the error committed." Margaret couldn't stop crying. Weeks of humiliation, despair, sleepless nights thinking about how she would support her children. All of this was finally coming to an end. "Mr. Harrison, thank you so much. You don't know what this means to me." "Margaret, actually, it was businessman Thomas Richardson who discovered the whole truth. He brought the evidence to us." "Mr. Thomas?" "Yes. He insisted very much that we do justice. He said you deserve to have your dignity restored. After hanging up, Margaret stood for a few minutes in the kitchen, processing everything she had just heard. Her innocence had been proven. Derek had confessed. Thomas had kept the promise he made at the bus stop. The phone rang again. This time it was Thomas himself. "Margaret, did you hear the good news?" "Mr. Thomas, I don't even know how to thank you for what you did for me." "Margaret, you don't need to thank me for anything. Justice had to be done. But why were you so interested in my case? You didn't even know me." Thomas was silent for a few seconds. "Margaret, can I tell you something? When I was young, my mother worked as a housekeeper for wealthy families. One day they accused her of stealing an expensive piece of jewelry. She was humiliated, fired, and nobody believed her word. And had she stolen it? Never. Weeks later, they discovered the jewelry had fallen behind furniture, but they never apologized to my mother. She carried that humiliation until the end of her life." Margaret felt her heart warm. "That's why you helped me. That's why. And because I saw in your eyes the same honesty I saw in my mother's eyes. Hard-working people who do right even when nobody's watching." "Mr. Thomas, how can I repay all this?" "Margaret, actually I wanted to make you a proposal." "What kind of proposal?" "Would you like to work at my company, at Richardson Consulting Group?" Margaret was surprised. "Work with you? But I'm a janitor, Mr. Thomas. You have a big, important company. Margaret, you have something that's more valuable than any diploma, character, and I need people of character on my team. But I don't understand anything about consulting, about business." "You don't need to. I'm offering a position in administration. You'd be responsible for taking care of employee welfare, organizing social benefits, coordinating mutual aid programs." Margaret could barely believe what she was hearing. "Are you offering me a better job?" "I'm offering you an opportunity to use your life experience to help other people who might be going through difficulties similar to yours." "Mr. Thomas, that would be a dream, but I have to think about my children, about the change. Margaret, the salary would be 3 times what you earned at Apex Financial, and the company offers complete health insurance for you and the children." Margaret felt tears returning to her eyes. 3 times more. Health insurance for the children. It was more than she had ever dreamed of. "Can I think about it for a few days?" "Of course. But Margaret, I want you to know that this offer isn't charity. It's recognition. Recognition of someone who showed strength and dignity in a very difficult situation." That night, Margaret talked to her children about everything that had happened. She explained that Mommy had been accused of something she didn't do, but that the truth had come out. "Mommy, does that mean you didn't do anything wrong?" asked her older daughter. "I didn't do anything wrong, my daughter, and now everyone knows it." "And the man who helped you, is he our friend now?" Margaret smiled. "He's more than a friend. He's a very special person who appeared in our lives when we needed him most." 2 days later, Margaret called Thomas with her answer. "Mr. Thomas, I accept your proposal. I want to work at your company." "Margaret, you just made my week. When can you start?" "Whenever you want." "Next Monday? Perfect." "Margaret, there's one more thing. I want you to be responsible for a special project I'm creating." "What project?" "An assistance fund for employees of companies who go through unjust situations like yours. A place where people like you can seek help when they don't have resources to defend themselves." Margaret was moved. "Mr. Thomas, does this mean we're going to help other people who go through what I went through?" "Exactly. You'll use your experience to identify similar cases and ensure that other families don't go through what yours did. It would be an honor to be part of a project like this." The following Monday, Margaret presented herself at Richardson Consulting Group. The building was smaller than Apex Financial, but there was something different in the environment. People greeted each other with genuine cordiality. Employees from different levels talked naturally. There was a climate of mutual respect that Margaret had never experienced. Thomas received her personally in the lobby. "Welcome to your new professional home, Margaret." "Thank you so much, Mr. Thomas. I'm very excited." "Come, I want to introduce you to the team." In the conference room, there were about 15 employees waiting. Thomas addressed everyone. "Everyone, I want to introduce Margaret Williams, our new social welfare coordinator." Margaret comes from a very difficult experience, where she demonstrated impressive strength of character. "I'm sure she'll add a lot to our family." The employees applauded warmly. Margaret felt her face flush, but it was a good feeling. For the first time in a long time, she was being introduced not as a victim, but as someone professionally valued. "Margaret," Thomas continued, "would you like to say something to the team?" Margaret took a deep breath. "Hi, everyone. I recently went through a very unjust situation. I was accused of something I didn't do and lost my job, but I learned that there are always good people willing to help those who are going through difficulties. I hope to do here what Mr. Thomas did for me." The applause was even warmer. Margaret saw genuine acceptance in people's faces, a welcoming that warmed her heart. Later, in her new office, Margaret looked out the window and saw the bus stop where it all began, where she had cried desperately, thinking her life was over. Now she was there, in a position better than she had ever imagined, with the opportunity to help other people. The phone rang. It was Harrison from Apex Financial. "Margaret, how are you adapting to your new job?" "Very well, Mr. Harrison. Thank you for asking. Margaret, I wanted to tell you that we made the official statement to all employees, making public apologies and clarifying your innocence. Besides that, your story became an example here. We're implementing new procedures so that injustices like this don't happen again. That's good to know. You transformed our company for the better. Thank you for that." When she hung up, Margaret smiled. Her painful experience had transformed into something positive, not just for her, but for other people too. The injustice had become a transforming force, and for the first time since it all began, Margaret fell asleep completely peaceful, knowing that her life had changed forever and that the best was yet to come. 3 months after starting at Richardson Consulting Group, Margaret was organizing documents for the Social Assistance Fund when she received a call that would completely change her perspective on the impact of her story. "Margaret, this is Christine Anderson, reporter from NBC News. We'd like to do a story about your case." Margaret felt her heart race. "A story about what exactly?" "About the injustice you suffered, and how businessman Thomas Richardson helped you. Your story is circulating on social media and touching thousands of people." "On social media? How?" "Someone posted your story on a Facebook group, and it's already been shared more than 100,000 times. People are moved by what happened." Margaret was stunned. She didn't imagine her experience could interest so many people. "And what do you want to know?" "We want to tell your complete story, show that there's still justice and good people in the world. Would you agree to give an interview?" Margaret hesitated. Talking on national television about everything she had been through would be reliving painful moments, but maybe it could help other people in similar situations. "Can I talk to my boss before giving an answer?" "Of course. But Margaret, there's information that might interest you. We found out what happened to Derek Mitchell." "What happened to him?" "He's being sued by Apex Financial and by Sterling Competition. Apparently, he leaked information to more than 3 different companies. The damage was in the millions." Margaret felt a mixture of satisfaction and pity. Satisfaction because justice was being done. Pity because Derek had destroyed his own life out of greed. After hanging up, Margaret went to Thomas's office to tell him about the TV invitation. Thomas, a reporter from NBC News, wants to do a story about our story. Our story? Thomas smiled. I like hearing that. And what do you think? I'm scared. I've never appeared on television. What if I say something wrong? Margaret, you have one of the most inspiring stories I know. Your strength, your dignity, your capacity to forgive. This needs to be known. But what if people judge me? What if they think I'm playing the victim? Thomas stood up and went to the window. Margaret, can I tell you something I discovered after you arrived here? What? Since we implemented the Social Assistance Fund, we've already helped 25 families who went through workplace injustices. 25 families who wouldn't have resources to defend themselves alone. Margaret was moved. Really? And do you know why this was possible? Because your experience taught us how to identify these cases and how to act quickly. Does this mean our story is already transforming lives? Exactly. And if you accept to give this interview, how many other families could be helped? Margaret thought about her children, Emma, now 8, who was finally receiving proper treatment for her asthma with the company's health plan, and Jake, 6, who was now studying at a better private school and loving his computer classes. Thomas, can I ask something? I'd like you to participate in the interview with me. Margaret, the story is yours. You're the hero. I'm not a hero alone. If you hadn't appeared at that bus stop, I'd still be suffering from the injustice. Thomas agreed. 3 days later, the NBC News team arrived at Richardson Consulting Group for the recording. Margaret had chosen to tell the complete story right there, in the environment where her life had been rebuilt. Margaret, reporter Christine Anderson began, how did you feel when you were unjustly accused? It was like the ground had disappeared from under my feet. I worked honestly my whole life. I raised my children teaching that stealing is wrong. And suddenly I was being treated as if I were a thief. And what was the most difficult moment? Margaret felt her eyes fill with tears. It was when I got home and had to explain to my children why Mommy had lost her job. Emma, my older daughter, has asthma and needs expensive medicines. Jake, my younger son, was excited to enter a new school. I didn't know how to say we wouldn't have money for these things. How did they react? Emma hugged me and said, Mommy, I know you didn't do anything wrong and we'll figure it out. Jake said he could stop studying to help me work. Margaret stopped, moved. Imagine a 6-year-old child offering to stop studying to help his mother. The reporter was also visibly touched. And that's when Mr. Thomas appeared. Thomas took over the conversation. I saw Margaret crying at the bus stop. There was something in her posture that caught my attention. It wasn't someone trying to get pity. It was someone genuinely desperate, but maintaining dignity. Why did you decide to get involved? Because I recognized in her the same dignity my mother showed when she went through a similar situation. And because I learned that when we have the means to help someone, it's not optional, it's obligatory. Margaret, how did it feel to discover that Derek had set it all up? It was a mixture of relief and indignation. Relief because my innocence was proven, indignation because he consciously destroyed my life to protect his own interests. Do you know Derek is being prosecuted? Thomas nodded. Yes, and we discovered that he harmed not just Margaret, but several companies. His scheme was much bigger than we imagined. Margaret, what's your situation today? Margaret smiled for the first time in the interview. Today, I work at a company that values me as a person. My children have health insurance. Emma is receiving proper treatment. Jake is at an excellent school. But more important than that, I'm helping other people who go through similar injustices. How so? We created a social assistance fund that has already helped 25 families in situations similar to mine. We provide legal, psychological, and financial support for people who don't have resources to defend themselves. The reporter turned to Thomas. Mr. Thomas, what advice would you give to other businessmen watching this interview? That they pay attention to the people around them, that they don't judge by appearance or social position, that they remember we can all make a difference in someone's life, especially when that person is going through difficulties. And for people who are suffering injustices, Margaret answered, don't give up. The truth always appears, even if it takes time, and there are always good people willing to help. Sometimes they appear at the most unexpected moments. When the team finished recording, Margaret felt a mixture of relief and concern. Relief for having told her version of the story, concern for not knowing how people would react. The story aired on a Thursday night. The next day, Richardson Consulting Group's phone didn't stop ringing. People offering help for the Social Assistance Fund, businessmen wanting to associate with the project, families telling similar stories and asking for guidance. Margaret, Thomas said, looking at the piles of messages arriving. I think we underestimated the impact our story would have. How so? We've already received over 500 calls, donation offers, requests for help, invitations for lectures. Your courage to tell the truth touched many more people than we imagined. Margaret picked up some of the messages. A businesswoman from Chicago wanted to create a similar fund in her company. A lawyer from Miami offered volunteer work for workplace injustice cases. A mother from Texas told about going through a similar situation and asked for guidance. Thomas, does this mean our story can help people across the country? It means you became a symbol of resistance and dignity. People who are suffering injustices now know they're not alone. That night, Margaret arrived home with a different feeling. For the first time since it all began, she felt that her painful experience had transformed into something bigger than herself. It wasn't just about her personal recovery anymore. It was about creating hope for other people. Mommy, Emma said during dinner, some kids at school saw you on TV. They said you're brave, and I said my mom is the bravest in the world. Jake completed, and I said you're going to help other families too now. Margaret hugged both children. You know everything I do is thinking about you, right? We know, and we know that now you're going to help other families too, Emma replied. Margaret smiled. Her children understood perfectly what was happening and completely supported the mission that had been born from pain, but had now transformed into life purpose. That night, while the children slept, Margaret looked out the window and thought about the bus stop where it all began. The place where she had cried desperately now seemed like the starting point of a journey that was just beginning. 1 year after the NBC story, Margaret was standing in front of a building she never imagined would exist. The Margaret Williams Institute for Social Justice rose imposingly in downtown Manhattan, with 7 floors dedicated exclusively to helping people going through workplace injustices. The name on the golden sign at the entrance still moved her every time she looked at it. "Mommy, are you crying again?" Jake asked, holding her hand at the building entrance. "These are tears of happiness, my love, tears from someone who can't believe what she's seeing." Emma, now 9 and completely cured of asthma thanks to proper treatment, pointed to a plaque on the wall. "Look, Mommy, founded by Thomas Richardson and Margaret Williams, where dignity meets justice." Thomas approached the group carrying a bouquet of white flowers. He had become much more than Margaret's boss. He was like an older brother, a family protector, someone who had transformed a tragedy into life purpose. "Ready for the big day?" he asked, nervously adjusting his tie. "Thomas, I still can't believe we achieved all this in just 1 year." "Margaret, you have no idea what we accomplished." "Come, I want to show you the numbers before the official inauguration." They went up to the 7th floor, where the Institute's general coordination functioned. The walls were full of photos, families that had been helped, businessmen who became partners, volunteer lawyers who dedicated time to difficult cases. Margaret, look at this, Thomas said, showing a report on the desk. In 12 months, we helped 580 families. We recovered over $8 million in compensation for wronged people. We have offices operating in 20 states. Margaret held the report with trembling hands. 580 families, 580 stories similar to hers that had found justice. And there's more, Thomas continued. Remember Apex Financial. How could I forget? Harrison called me yesterday. Since your story became public, they completely changed their internal protocols. They created a specific ombudsman for employees, implemented more rigorous investigations before any dismissal. Your experience transformed the entire company culture. And Derek, convicted to 8 years, restitution of all amounts, and prohibition from holding positions of trust. But you know what impresses me most? He sent you a letter. Thomas took an envelope from a drawer. It arrived last week. Margaret opened the letter curiously. The handwriting was shaky, from someone clearly shaken. Margaret, I know I'll never be able to repair the harm I did to you and your family. I destroyed your life out of greed and cowardice. But I want you to know that every day I think about the injustice I committed. Seeing what you built after everything that happened made me understand the kind of person I should have been. I hope someday you can forgive me. With sincere repentance, Derek. Margaret folded the letter slowly. Thomas, can I ask something? Of course. I want you to send a response to him. What do you want me to write? That I already forgave him, that holding grudges only hurts those who hold them, and that if he really changed, he can look for the Institute when he serves his sentence. There's always room for people who want to help others. Thomas looked at Margaret with admiration. You never stop surprising me. I learned that revenge doesn't build anything, but compassion can transform anyone. At that moment, the secretary appeared at the door. Margaret, the special guests for the inauguration have arrived. They went down to the main floor, where a crowd was gathering. Journalists, businessmen, politicians, but mainly ordinary people who had been benefited by the Institute's work. Margaret saw familiar faces, families they had helped, volunteer lawyers, employees who dedicated themselves daily to the cause. Christine Anderson, the reporter who had done the first story, approached with her team. Margaret, how do you feel seeing all this that was born from your story? I feel grateful. Grateful for having gone through that terrible experience, because without it, none of this would exist. Explain better. If I hadn't been wronged, I never would have met Thomas. If I hadn't met Thomas, we never would have created the assistance fund. If we hadn't created the fund, today 580 families would still be suffering injustices. The answer moved even the cameraman. What message would you leave for people watching who are going through similar injustices? Margaret looked directly at the camera. Don't give up. The darkest night always ends in the most beautiful dawn. And remember, sometimes God allows us to go through storms to teach us to value the calm. Your pain today can be the strength that will help other people tomorrow. Thomas took the microphone for the official inauguration speech. Ladies and gentlemen, this institute exists because a courageous woman transformed injustice into purpose. Margaret Williams taught me that true wealth isn't what we accumulate, but what we share. That success isn't measured by the profits we generate, but by the lives we touch. The audience applauded warmly. Margaret felt her chest warm, but not from shame, like that terrible day at Apex Financial. It was the warmth of someone who saw an impossible dream becoming reality. "Mommy," Emma whispered, "can I say something at the microphone?" Margaret hesitated, but Thomas signaled yes. Emma approached the microphone, and her childish voice echoed in the packed hall. "My name is Emma, Margaret's daughter. When Mommy lost her job, I got very scared. Scared of not having money for medicine, scared of not being able to study. But Mommy taught me that when something bad happens, we can choose to be sad forever, or use that sadness to help other people. Mommy chose to help, and now many children like me won't need to be afraid. There wasn't a dry eye in the hall. Jake joined his sister, and I want to say that my mother is the most courageous person in the world. She transformed tears into smiles for many families. Margaret went up on stage and hugged both children. You are my greatest wealth. Everything I do is thinking about leaving a better world for you. Harrison Blake, the director of Apex Financial, approached the stage. Margaret hadn't seen him since the day of reintegration. Margaret, can I say something? She felt curious. Margaret, your story changed my life, changed our company, changed the way I see people around me. I want to apologize once more publicly for the injustice we committed, and I want to announce that Apex Financial will be a permanent partner of the Institute, contributing $2 million annually for program maintenance. The announcement surprised even Thomas. $2 million per year would guarantee the Institute's operation for decades. Margaret approached the microphone one last time. I want to end this ceremony by returning to where it all began. Everyone left the building and walked a few blocks until they reached the bus stop where Margaret had cried desperately a year before. The same bench, the same stop, but now with a small golden plaque. Here was born the Margaret Williams Institute, where hope met compassion. Margaret sat on the bench exactly as she had done that terrible day, but this time she wasn't alone. Thomas sat beside her, as he had the first time. The children settled at her feet. Dozens of people who had been helped by the Institute formed a circle around them. Exactly 1 year ago, Margaret said, I was sitting in this same place, crying, thinking my life was over. I didn't imagine that a stranger would approach and change everything. And I, Thomas completed, didn't imagine that helping someone at a bus stop would become the most important purpose of my life. An elderly lady approached the group. It was Mrs. Rodriguez, the first person the Institute had helped. She had been unjustly fired after 25 years of work at a cleaning company. Margaret, can I thank you once more? Mrs. Rodriguez, you don't need to thank me. I do. Because of your courage to tell your story, I got justice. My granddaughter can continue studying. My family has dignity back. Other people approached, each with a transformation story. The taxi driver who recovered his unjustly revoked license, the teacher who was reinstated after false accusation, the waiter who received compensation for disguised slave labor. When the sun began to set, Margaret stood up from the bench and looked one last time at that place that had been the dividing point of her life. Thomas, do you know what I learned from all this? What? That there's no such thing as coincidence. There's purpose. You didn't appear in my life by chance. My painful experience wasn't in vain. Everything was part of a bigger plan. Thomas smiled. Margaret, can I tell you a secret? Of course. That day when I saw you crying at the bus stop, I was coming back from a meeting where I had closed the biggest contract of my company. I was feeling like the most successful man in the world. And then I met you and understood that real success isn't the money we earn, it's the good we do. You taught me what really matters in life. Margaret hugged Thomas. Then we both saved each other. As they walked back, Jake asked, Mommy, will our story have a happy ending? Margaret looked at her children, at Thomas, at all the people who had become family throughout that transformative year. My son, our story doesn't have an ending, it has continuation. And it will continue every time someone helps a person going through difficulties, every time someone believes in a person when everyone doubted, every time someone transforms pain into purpose. He was right. Margaret and Thomas's story multiplied into hundreds of other stories. The Margaret Williams Institute became a national reference in social justice. But more important than that, it taught the world that small acts of compassion can generate gigantic transformations. 10 years later, when Margaret turned 45, she returned once more to that bus stop, not to cry but to give thanks. Thanks for having lived the greatest injustice of her life, because without it, she never would have discovered her true mission in the world. And every time someone asked what the secret was to transform tragedy into triumph, Margaret answered, "Never let your pain be in vain. Use it to heal others' pain."